Hello, friends. Welcome to another show, I Want to Know, the show dedicated to our government, the people involved in our government, and how it all ticks. It's election season, COVID election season in 2020, and I'm going to be interviewing some candidates, local candidates for office. And I'm honored to have Vin Candelora joining me, who represents the 86th district, which is North Branford, Killingworth,
North Branford, Guilford, Durham, and Wallingford.
Thank you very much. So you were elected in '06, so you've served some time. You want to tell, the few that may not know about you, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I live in North Branford with my wife, Carolyn, and 3 kids. And I've been involved, I guess, in government for about 20 years. I served on the town council for about 7 years. And I've served as state representative for the 86th district for the last 14 years. I'm currently serving as deputy leader of the House, and I've been involved with the screening of all the bills, so I review all the bills that come before the House chamber, and been heavily involved in the budget as well.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And you were served quite some time before COVID. How did COVID switch things up for you guys?
It's been dramatic. The process has really changed. We lost all of last session. So bills that were proposed in February that we were debating and had public hearings for in March, we abruptly stopped on, I think it was March 11th was the last day we had gone in. So we are starting to transition to a virtual type of public hearings and process. I will say it's functional, but I don't think it's as good as the in-person.
The in-person where you can get somebody's vibe, really interact with them on a personal level.
That's right. So the communication is very difficult, especially when you're dealing with a bill that's dealing with a lot of different interests. You want to be able to talk to all the different people. So I think that is going to be a challenge. I think it's going to be a challenge going into next session as well.
You've run for office. What do you like most about the campaign cycle? What do you least like about it? And how has the COVID situation switched that up?
Yeah, I mean, so I enjoy the campaign cycle of getting out and knocking doors and talking to constituents and hearing what the issues are. I think having done it for as long as I have right now, it does get a little tiring at times. COVID has really thrown everything upside down because knocking on doors in the middle of a pandemic is dicey. Some people don't want that type of interaction. But also what's happened is usually there's a break. So come July, your legislative work slows down and you begin campaigning. Right now what we're experiencing is that we haven't stopped with our state rep duties. So I get the calls from Department of Labor for unemployment claims. We're still addressing different pieces of legislation that need to happen. So being in leadership, I'm on almost daily calls and weekly calls trying to address those issues as well. So I haven't been able to transition from being a public official to a candidate.
Right. You're not in, it's hard to know, how much opportunity you're going to have for that as well.
Right.
What committees, in addition to reviewing all the legislation that's going through, are you on other committees as well? Is that your responsibility?
I serve on general law, which covers Department of Consumer Protection, so our liquor laws, contracting laws. I've also served on public health for a number of years, so it deals with all our public health issues. So obviously, the COVID issues are also right on my plate, being a member of that committee. And so I've also have served on the screening committee. I've been on the education committee as well. And I'm currently on the finance committee, which is sort of the tax revenue and bonding committee in the state.
And that brings me, to some questions that we've had even before COVID, which COVID brought everything else to a halt, but that doesn't mean there are no longer issues, right? So you're dealing with tax issues in Connecticut, infrastructure issues in Connecticut. Would you like to,
yeah, I mean,
review
Connecticut,
some of that? And
not to be too depressing, but Connecticut has a lot of work ahead of itself. In 2017, I was one of 8 legislators that actually co-authored a bipartisan budget which I was very proud of. We put in spending caps and revenue caps and had all sorts of mechanisms that actually generated a $3 billion surplus for the state of Connecticut. The hope is that that money would go toward paying down our unfunded liabilities, which is really choking the state, that being our pension liabilities. When COVID hit, the likelihood of being able to use that money now to pay down that debt is unlikely. And so right now, in this current year that we're in, we're faced with over a $2 billion deficit. And then in the out years, they're each about $3.5 billion. So over the course of 3 years, we have a $9 billion deficit. To put it in perspective, our budget is only about, on the high side, it's about $20 billion. So it's a significant percentage of the budget, anywhere from 1% to 1.5%, that we're going to need to find savings. The COVID money that came in is not allowed to offset revenue losses.
Right. That's federal. The
federal money,
grant money. Yeah.
So that money needs to go toward addressing the pandemic. So right now at this time, there's not a lot of relief out there for these deficits. And one of my criticisms that I would say is we need to walk and chew gum at the same time. COVID obviously is a huge issue, but we need to also start paying attention to the fiscal house. We can't just go all in on the virus and ignore everything else around us.
Because those problems don't go away.
They don't, and they compound because time is money.
Right, and we're not addressing, we can't, you guys are only human, I understand that, but still these problems are compounding, piling up, and so when we do have some relief from this, there you go, you have your work cut out for you.
That's right, and so by statute, the governor is actually obligated to come out with a deficit mitigation plan because our budget deficit has now exceeded the percentage threshold.
Wow.
So by the end of September, he is supposed to come out with a plan, and the legislature is going to try to address it. I'm a little concerned that that won't happen.
What other issues then on the campaign trail, they would say, are you really focusing on? I mean, because you get questions from all over the spectrum.
Yeah, and
addressing
I think
small business is one of them, perhaps, the schools are another.
Right. Some of the issues that I really want to see, the two areas to me that's critical because you can't get these years away are nursing homes and our schools. I think the state of Connecticut, if this pandemic is going to last for multiple years, we think there'll be a vaccine, but we have to assume...
We hope.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have to assume this is going to be a new normal.
Right.
So we really need to focus on nursing homes and visitation for our elderly population. I've seen just my own family members decline significantly being in isolation. That needs to be addressed. For our children, I'm concerned about their lack of socialization, the impact of distance learning, especially on special ed children. I think it's now more than ever that the state needs to fund special education on a statewide level so that we could equalize the education that our special needs children are getting, because they really it's difficult for them to succeed with online learning.
Wasn't there a law that changed how special education was funded about a year ago?
A little bit in the bipartisan budget, it sort of lumped it in with the ECS, but it didn't really...
Education costs sharing, if people need to know.
Correct, yeah. Sorry about that.
That's right.
It didn't really change the mechanism. I'm more talking about, I think, the support services. I think we do need to try to unify some of these districts. I think North Branford has done a phenomenal job by going back in person. I do think that's the best case scenario for districts, and that's the goal that we all should be striving toward. And every district doing something different has put strains on families and their ability to juggle everything.
To plan and to work. I mean, the challenge to parents is profound. You and I have kids in the high school, but if we had fifth graders or younger, what do parents do? It's
dramatic. And I think so, even with some of the public health decisions that are being made, what I want to see is a metric that reaches beyond just the virus. We start looking at the socioeconomic impacts. We look at the educational impacts. We need to start looking at our drug abuse numbers.
Sure.
They're rising. Domestic violence is rising.
Sure.
So we need to start creating a balance between all of those things.
And I was just reading an article this morning about how this situation the world is facing is increasing the disparities in income levels, right? So
Right.
people that can work from home have typically not seen that much a reduction in their pay, but people that have to go to work, hourly workers, they really suffer.
When I talk to the state reps in Fairfield County in the wealthy communities, their experiences have been very different than the experiences of the families in North Branford.
Sure.
And so it is interesting, and even I look at our inner cities.
A concentration of wealth, you're saying, in Fairfield versus New Haven or
Right,
Bridgeport?
they have more options.
Sure.
I mean, football got canceled. There are towns in Fairfield County they were able to raise $100,000, created their own football league, and their children will be playing football in Fairfield County. Children, if they have to stay home with online learning, people can afford to hire tutors.
Mm-hmm.
They could afford to hire these COVID pods that are educational tools for the kids. And they have sort of a mini online school system set up. Kids in New Haven don't have those opportunities.
Right.
And
the parents have to work too.
That's right.
Yeah.
And when you look at the statistics, we have large numbers of children in poverty that have never logged in to their iPads.
They don't have access. They don't have that access to technology, to internet.
And we're losing thousands of kids since March. And so that's what we really need to start talking about and paying attention to. And that's why I say I'm glad that North Branford went back. The children show up in the classroom or they're home fully online, but they're all accounted for.
Mm-hmm, right.
And we don't have that same opportunity in every district because some districts are completely shuttered.
Or some districts are just that massive that it's really easy to fall through the cracks.
Right.
Where here we have a smaller district. It's interesting, we've talked before about consolidation of different services. And you do think that, we have 160 some odd towns in Connecticut, which potentially is 160 superintendents, infrastructure, all that type of stuff, where other states, they don't have that. I went to a regional school district in Ohio, and, it's expensive and is redundant, but not consistent, as you're saying as well.
Yeah, we have a very unique structure.
It's an old state.
Right. And they've always looked at it, and it's something that there's a task force that's committed to look at our educational structure again. I think a lot of those issues are going to be sidelined for a couple of years.
Sure.
Because of this pandemic.
Sure. If it's let's work on the stuff that is broken right now,
Right.
not what's working.
Right.
What about moving forward? What are you trying to address during COVID? Small business, you have a small business.
Yeah, one of the issues that we have to look at is the hospitality industry has gotten decimated. So how do we prop that up? Our restaurants, they need to create different infrastructures. And so we need to take a look at, especially in terms of capital, are there things that need to be done to help fortify buildings to allow for indoor dining or indoor activities? And I think people have figured out how to limp along, but I'm very concerned about the winter months. We're actually meeting with the governor's office this week and talking about what it's going to look like and try to do it on a bipartisan basis.
Moving forward, what are you trying to work on this next session, provided you get reelected?
Yeah, I think the biggest
Other
issue,
than everything else that you have going on.
right. I think the biggest issue right now is going to be the budget. I did have a domestic violence bill that I want to re-propose next year. It got wiped out with COVID, but when a domestic violence or a victim of domestic violence applies for state services and tries to get out of a bad home, the income of the abusing spouse gets attributed to them. And so it makes it impossible for them to get those services, temporary services they need to get out of the home. And so I had legislation that I proposed to allow for somebody's income to not be included so they would be able to get out of the home and receive temporary services. That has received bipartisan support, so it's something I do want to look at. I think we have issues with trash issues are huge. In Connecticut, we're shifting to landfills right now, and we need to start looking at our waste to energy plants again, which does tie into our electric grid, how we can help prop them up and get them more modernized and up to date. So those are just, I think, another big issue that we're going to start hearing about, because municipal waste is going to start, the fees are going to start increasing dramatically.
Oh man, and the volume has increased dramatically as well. You know, the one landfills are saying, "Are you guys serious?"
Well, that's what's scary right now, is we're moving back to landfills.
Oh yeah,
because the waste to energy is failing, and part of it is, I believe, that we put so much into solar, and we're putting it into wind, that we can't forget about that mechanism, because it doesn't just produce energy, it's getting rid of our waste in a clean way.
Right.
You know, the other issue is we have a lot of the windmills going off on Long Island Sound. I think we need to take a look at that. There is...
Expanding, or?
I think taking a break.
Taking a break, okay.
You know, it sounds good at first, but when you start learning about the environmental hazards that can be associated with it, 3,000 gallons of oil per windmill could potentially leak into Long Island Sound. They're not rated for a Category 5 storm. So I think we have to rethink that process now that we're seeing the dramatic change in our weather with these stronger storms. We need to make sure that those type of windmills that we proposed, you know, it's been in the hopper for 3 years. We've been working on it. You know, the climate has changed, and is it appropriate right now?
Clean energy is a good topic, because, you know, in North Branford, we just signed a new solar project. You want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so what that does is, it's a solar farm that a private business signed up for, and having the town being a beneficiary of it, that revenue goes into the town. It's part of the virtual net metering that was done in the state. It's capped because the energy company, you know, Eversource and UI don't like it. It costs them money, but slowly that cap keeps getting increased, and it's part of the discussion in this session going in is, can we add it now, which would help bring money into North Branford.
Raise the cap, you're saying?
To raise the cap.
And plus, you know, Eversource, we are lucky we have UI by and large, in Wallingford Electric, but, you know, Eversource has been on the hot seat. I know you guys are having to address their issues as well up in Hartford, but I don't know if that's something that you undertake.
Yeah, so it is something that we are looking at. I'll say there's, you know, performance-based standards that are being put into the bill, which I think is a good thing. They need to be held accountable. Hiring ratios, making sure that you have a minimum level of staffing to deal with storms. The more controversial pieces are these, you know, giving back for spoiled food, giving people a credit.
Right, we have had storms where people reimburse $5,000 or something for a refrigerator.
Right. So some of those reimbursements, while they sound good, and they'll probably end up in the bill, it's going to come back on your bill. Ultimately, you're going to be paying more.
We pay for it.
So, you know, what balance do we strike? Because, you know, the company should be held accountable for the egregious behavior. One of the criticisms I did have is the lack of communication.
The lack of communication, but the egregious behavior is not maintaining their infrastructure, so we get into these messes.
Well, and that's true, but it made it even worse because there was no communication.
Right.
So I think those channels need to be rebuilt, because if people knew you're going to be without power for 3 days and here's what we're doing, and we could have reported that information, the anxiety levels go down.
Right.
And most people can deal with a 3-day turnoff. But, you know, like, we have priority districts. So our senior center is one of the top priorities that gets waited on when there's a storm. They get their power back first because they're a designated area. You know, the communication wasn't so good there, and they're one of the last ones to get restored.
Wow. So a week later.
Right.
Okay.
Well, it wasn't that long, but it was later than everybody else. So that's an issue. However, the underlying bill, because it's the way it's written, my concern is it's encouraging them to put power back on to the most amount of people as quickly as possible at the expense of the priority.
High priority. I hear what you're saying.
So we've got to make sure we don't do that, because especially the senior communities really need to have their power first.
Sure, sure. What's a matter of life and death? Plus, with people that may have, you know, medical equipment that they're relying on,
that's right.
They need to know what they have to plan for as well.
That's right.
Other clean energy issues, that you
that one's probably the big topic that we're seeing. I mean, obviously there's been talk about reforming the police accountability bill that was passed in July. That is a measure that I think I voted against. I don't believe it accomplished what we wanted it to. It's going to have an adverse impact, not just on our police force, but I think on North Branford. And I think we're going to see increased expenses and costs because of it, just in the way of insurance. There has been discussion with the other side of the aisle to try to go back in and fix it. It's the one thing I don't like. What's happened in our legislature is when you act on emotion, and so you're playing to different audiences, you don't necessarily do your best work. And I think that's sort of what happened with that bill. It was rushed through at a time when people's emotional levels were very high on both sides of the issue. And now we're trying to untangle a bill that's problematic from a technical standpoint and a policy standpoint.
Okay. Maybe it's a good time then to talk about, the rush to accomplish, say, the legislature accomplished something, but largely based on emotion, and, that's fed by social media largely nowadays.
Yeah.
And I know elected officials have voted both ways, and both sides were attacked. People, businesses were threatened.
Right.
People were attacked. And, it's my belief, I've served in office and I'd like to again, but, it's not a one issue world. And, you have to just be able to explain where you're coming from, but you shouldn't. Why would anybody do what you're doing if you vote one way, I disagree with you, and I threaten to burn your house down?
Yeah, it's a very difficult time to be in politics.
And how has that changed from when you were first elected?
Yeah.
Because it's been more than 10 years.
I do blame it on social media. And I think one of the things I strive to do is focus on the issues, not the personalities. So I get along with Democrats up in Hartford. We go out together. Do we disagree on issues? Absolutely. Will we debate on the floor and vote different ways? Absolutely. But it doesn't change the fact that we're all human beings.
And we also I disagree with Democrats just as much as I do Republicans. It's not.
That's right. I mean, when you go up there, it's not so partisan. There's a lot of votes that are all over the place.
Sure.
You have D's and R's voting every which way. But what I have found is that the process has become more instant gratification.
And full of vitriol too, right?
Yeah, and you're quickly running to tweet something or put up a headshot and take a picture of something, rather than just focusing on what you're actually doing, and that is making laws that are going to affect people for a very long time. So the deliberation has become less substantive in Hartford, and I find that a little frustrating. I've always said a story. When I was elected in 2006, and actually 2008, we had 37 Republicans in the House and 114 Democrats. And I felt more comfort with the interaction and the bill deliberations, even with that lopsidedness.
The support was mutual, right?
And I think we worked harder.
Yeah.
I just think we paid attention to the bills a little bit more. Whereas today, we have 60 Republicans in the House and 91 Democrats. And I don't find, it's more of a personal gratification process. So I want this bill because it's my bill, it's good for me. And there's less of this understanding of the greater good.
The greater good, 30,000 foot type of viewpoint, right? What would your recommendations be for somebody interested in getting involved in politics and hopefully getting elected?
I think what's critical for everybody is start out at the ground level. Don't run for state office right out of the box. I started out on the local zoning board of appeals. It was a process I'll never forget. I remember going in for my first meeting. You take a vote, and somebody's going to be unhappy with your decision. And so I think that's what forced me to really consider the issues, because I couldn't just vote and make everybody happy. There was usually somebody opposing a variance and somebody wanting a variance. And then moving on to town council and understanding the budget and the process, I think it's just helpful. And I think that's the best way to start out, is start out local.
how has campaigning changed over the past 10 years? I mean, we're not knocking on doors now. I mean, I guess today is kind of an anomaly, hopefully.
Yeah, door knocking is still the go-to choice. I think you're seeing more digital ads now as opposed to ads in newspapers.
Sure.
You're seeing more texting as opposed to phone calling because people don't answer their home phones anymore.
Probably
so
more efficient.
Yeah, we're seeing more of a shift to the digital media.
But then you also lose the interaction, you know, the one-on-one interaction.
You do, and that's why it's hard to penetrate. You know, I've been doing this for 14 years, and I'm out there. My business is in town, and I try to get out as much as I can. And it's especially in COVID, it's very difficult to sort of penetrate a message in this world.
When I was running for town council, you know, I would ride my bike from door to door.
Yeah.
And 99% of the people, you know, were just surprised that somebody was knocking on their door. And they were thrilled with that. And it was great. You know, I met a lot of people that you now see at the grocery store or whatever. It was a really good experience. I mean, I think campaigning's the fun in it all. And then, you know, the difficult part is, as you said, going through budget, all the legislation that you look at.
The hours and hours and hours. It's
so right. You can't just put that bike down and just go back to bed.
No.
It's never ending.
That's the easy part.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, we have to wrap up soon. Any further messages you'd like to put forth?
No, I think just for the general public, you know, I am here in the time of COVID. If people have questions, especially Department of Labor and DMV issues, email me or call me. You know, this is something that we're all in this together,
right.
Whether we believe in, you know, different ways of going about curing this virus or mitigating this virus. We are all in as a community together, and I think by and large North Branford and the 86th District has done a great job. And
Connecticut has done a great job.
Yes.
I mean, we're in the top 4 low infection rate states in the country, so we should be proud of that. We're all in this together, and you know, Hartford is working together when it comes to this to make it work as well. So congratulations on that for sure.
Thanks.
To everybody. Okay, well, my name is Dan Armin. Thank you for joining us for another show. And thanks to Vin Candelora. I wish you all the best, of course.
Thanks for having me.
You've done this before, and I appreciate your time. And we'll see you in the near future. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.